by the sacrifice that they did to come during our holidays, during our break, for several days to ruminate and discuss and carry out this wondrous national assignment. I therefore wish to congratulate the chairman of the committees and members of those committees for the sacrifice that they have made on behalf of this nation. I would also like to draw attention of our colleagues not to be surprised or intimidated by the figures. What we are having today is a very unprecedented level of world economic downturn that has resulted not only from the COVID losses and adversities that had happened, but also from world events where we are only witnessing the revival of the oil prices from which in the past we have hinged the development of our economy upon. We should not be afraid of the fiscal deficit. This deficit is necessary. In fact, in the world today, there is no nation, with maybe a possible exception of China, that is free from this huge deficit. The same debate that we are holding here is the debate that they are holding in the United States. In fact, the Democrats are talking about a higher spending on their infrastructure. The Republicans on the lower one. It is raising a lot of that in the US. I know it also raised that here. But the problem that we are having is that we have a deficit of about 5.63 or 62 trillion, which is just slightly above the deficit that we had last year. Now, in normal economy, if economy is growing, you need to reduce the deficit. But during times of economic crisis, you can't tighten your belt. Because once you tighten your belt, you run the tendency of stagnation and very, very high inflation. And this, in the times when we have terrible security challenges in this country, going that road is going fast of economic immolation and economic oblivion. We should accept the realities of our time by trying to find out some other means of reducing the amount of debt that we take through some new strategies like PPPs, public-private partnership around more investment in our infrastructure, which we are trying to do by amending certain acts, including the Railway Act, the road sector, transportation issues, where we are trying to open several sectors of our economy for private sector investment. That is the only way in which we can be able to attract private capital so that we can reduce foreign borrowing. But those acts are now on the pipeline, and the moment they come to us and we privatize and allow the private sector to come into our several sectors of our economy, then we can be able to relax the amount dependence on foreign debt. But before then, for anybody to advocate tightening, belt tightening, that is a path to self-immolation. It's better for us to survive with debt than to die of hunger. So, Mr. President, I want to congratulate the committee, and that I'm just anticipating some of the issues that are going to come, but we don't like that. But sometimes it becomes necessary for survival. And when it becomes necessary for survival, we have to swallow that pill in order to survive. I thank you, Mr. President. I also thank members for giving me this opportunity too.
Senators.
In making the observations, Mr. President, I'm taking into consideration some of the criticism already in the public domain before now. I want to say, Mr. President, that listening to the chairman of finance, I agree with their proposal of $57 per barrel being proposed for 2022-2023. Again, Mr. President, putting the official rates of the exchange rate at 410, I hope we'll be able to manage that. My main point, Mr. President, will be on the issue of borrowing. Mr. President, a lot has been said and a lot of fear expressed by quite a number of people that borrowing by our nation is getting too much. But to me, Mr. President, I hold the strong view that while borrowing could be a thing of fear, the question must be, our borrowing is for what? If the borrowing is meant to meet the development of infrastructural facilities, to me, that will enhance productivity and the well-being of the people, I think there's nothing bad about borrowing. It is how the borrowing is being channeled. Today, Mr. President, many of our highways are not motorable. In fact, that explains why we equally have increase in insecurity in our nation. Many roads that ought to have been constructed long before now are still lying fallow with potholes. We still have problem of electricity, Mr. President. Quite a number of areas cannot tell you when last they had the privilege of having electricity in their homes. Again, Mr. President, the cost of electricity itself is getting beyond the reach of the poor. Mr. President, our emphasis as a chamber should be, what are this money going to be channeled into? If borrowing will be meant to galvanize socio-economic development by providing infrastructural facilities, I think it is well spent money. And I don't know of any nation that is today facing the challenges of development, looking at the COVID pandemic, that is not borrowing. Our concern must be, what are we borrowing for? If our borrowing is to develop infrastructural facilities, our educational facilities, I think it is a good thing to borrow, to develop education and increase capacity of the younger generation, to give them proper education. It's still, well, some people may not come to be infrastructure or capital project. To me, borrowing must be channeled towards empowering the people, providing the basic infrastructural facilities that will help to expand the economic activities of our people. If that is what this borrowing is meant for, Mr. President, I think we should all support borrowing. We should all support borrowing that will help to develop our nation. We are not going to deny the fact that Nigeria, inclusive, nations of the world today, are faced with the problem of the pandemic. Economic activities have been grounded. Today, Mr. President, I will take aviation, for example. There are up to 10 international airlines that are no longer coming to Nigeria. Not because they had problem with Nigeria airspace, but because even in their nations, the passengers are not just there. People are not just traveling again. That is affecting aviation. So Mr. President, I think in the case of Nigeria, we are fighting a dual battle, a dual war. While we are facing the problem of insecurity on one hand, then our economy, the stronghold, the oil, is falling. So we have no option than to borrow. But the borrowing must be channeled towards infrastructural development, Mr. President. The total sum of money we have voted.
You may random, please.
It's about $3 billion to look at it. Because yesterday we were trying to do some conversion. Now we now compare what we are putting into armed forces security with a nation like Pakistan, for instance. They had about $12 billion for the armed forces. So we still have a lot to do. And Nigeria is faced with insecurity problems. Our infrastructures are bad. So if our borrowing is going to be channeled towards those things that will empower the people, provide infrastructure facilities, Mr. President, I think we should support that. The task is for us to monitor how this money will be spent and to make sure that they are spent for the purpose that which Nigerian people will be happy and they will see the result. I just submit, Mr. President.
Joint committee for a job that can be described as well done, considering the efforts put in bringing this report. But, Mr. President, sir, there are some concerns that can be deduced from the report. The medium expenditure framework has always been the basis that will determine the workability of whatever arrangement the country intends to make in respect of budgeting. Mr. President, let me tell you today that as at today, the dollar exchange rate is 575 this morning. Now, that's a black market as they call it. Now, let us assume that we can take 410.15 to a US dollar as proposed in the 2022-2024 budget approval. But on the other side, you will have seen that recommendation 8 is saying that the 3.5 billion International Monetary Fund loan at the rate of 0.1 to 0.2 be approved to show up its internal borrowing and to reduce external borrowing because of exchange rate risk. Now, the differentials are, if we adopt the 410 today, with what we have as at today, is 165 naira. And if you total it to what we are likely going to see will be deposit. My concern is that in the last medium expenditure debate, we were told that because of heavy investment in agriculture by way of anchor borrowers and that, our GDP was going to grow because we were going to have enough to export outside the country. But I'm absolutely sure that if we are to take this report today, we will have seen that and conveniently conclude that the desired result in the last proposal has not been met. And this is a matter that I think we should look at. Then the second one, sir, is the issue of saying that all laws relating to mining businesses should be reviewed as a matter of urgency. Mr. President, today, Ghana has taken the lead in this mining issue as it relates to gold. And comparatively, what we have is uncoordinated, uncontrolled mining of our resources in the country. So when we talk of royalties, we are not going to have, based on what we know is on ground, any revenue that can be said to be appreciable without dealing specifically with the structure of mining in Nigeria. So the expected revenue from that, Mr. President, may not necessarily represent the true position of what we should expect. Then the other recommendation, which is recommendation 17, that the Act establishing some MDS be reviewed and be amended as a matter of urgency to evidence a more nationalistic interest, as these amendments will assist to generate more revenue to the coffers of the government. Now, we are doing this within, this thing is for 2022-2024. The issue is, how long will it take us to amend these laws for them to become operational and give the desired result for the purpose of being incorporated in the 2022-2024 expenditure framework? And I think that we are being over-ambitious with that recommendation. Recommendation 18 says that the federal government budget be reviewed and be purged of some agencies that demonstrated capacity to stand on their own without any recourse to federal government of Nigeria. For example, the Agency for Food and Drug Administration and the Nigerian College of Aviation, Zaria. I cannot speak for NAFDAC, but I can conveniently, with authority, speak for Nigerian College of Aviation, Zaria. This cannot represent the position. I have been Vice Chairman of Aviation Committee in the last Senate, and I'm still the Vice Chairman of the Aviation Committee of this Senate. And based on my limited understanding of the operational requirement of that college, we cannot validly say that they have demonstrated sufficient distance to stand on their own without federal government budget. So my concern is that those proposals that appear a little bit not sustainable, we must be careful in handling them so that we will have a robust foundation for building the 2022 budget based on the recommendation of the committee. But let me say that the committee has done a very good job and it's thorough, but it is expected that these discrepancies that are minor but fundamental, be taken into account when we do pass this position. Thank you very much.
Done to that of a thesis of a PhD student. And if a professor is to mark this script, professor of economy, to mark this script, the professor will give them credits for what the committee has done. Mr. President, the observations, specifically observations 9 to 19, upon which the recommendations are based, Mr. President, very germane. And if you take all that together, it is very obvious to me, as somebody who is not an economist, I lay no claim to that particular profession. But having gone through this script with the chairman of the committee here this morning, as I sat down here, I listened to him. Nigeria has no reason to say we are broke. No reason to say we are broke. From observations, please, this is very important, from observations 9 to 19, if government follows this particular script religiously, then Nigeria has no reason to be broke. Because there are a lot of leakages in government, leakages that nobody can explain. And therefore, tying that to the recommendation 16, that we must strengthen the Fiscal Responsibility Act, the Commission, the Accountant General's Office, the Auditor General's Office, then we have every reason to say we have money in this country. Borrowing is not bad, in my humble view. Borrowing cannot be seen to be bad, no. So long as you are borrowing for a purpose, and you also have a plan to pay back that particular loan, then we will not support. You borrow for a purpose. There's no doubt about the fact that Nigeria is in trouble. We're in trouble because of the leakages that we have in the country. Everywhere, there are leakages from this paper. It's not from me, it's from the paper, by the committee, the joint committee. So, Mr. President, my respected colleagues, as far as I'm concerned, we cannot we cannot say we are a poor country. Never. What is important is for you to look inwards. Look inwards about what is happening around you. If you know that there is something around you that you have not exploited, then you exploit that thing for you to stand firm. That is what is important, Mr. President. And then again, the only issue I want to mention is about the VAT. We must be very careful basing whatever we want to do in 2022 about VAT. Because the VAT issue is a vexed issue. It is already, I think, a motion. A particular issue has been taken to the Supreme Court. And in the course of the year, it is very likely that a determination of that issue will come up. And therefore, it's like a pregnant woman. It could be a man, it could be a woman. Or could still birth. You never can tell. So we don't want to have crisis somewhere along the line in 2022, God forbid, if what we are doing is based, maybe 20% or 30% is based on the vast issue of VAT. That is my submission, because since this medium-term expenditure framework is what is going to lay the foundation for the budget debate that will come up later this year. And therefore, that is my view. And then, talking about, Mr. President, the exchange rate, which is very, very uncertain. It is important for us to make projections that are likely to be correct. It is very important, Mr. President, because only recently, even the official rate was adjusted by the CBN, not quite long ago, about 2 or 3 days ago. So with that uncertainties that are there, it is important for us to warn ourselves ahead of time. Mr. President, having said that, thank you very much for the opportunity given to me. God bless you all.
Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, Mr. President, let me give kudos to the committee which I also belong to. they have an unhealthy tax of having to deal with a very complicated financial situation that we found ourselves in. Mr. President, we're discussing the medium-term expenditure framework as presented by the chairman, also presented to us by the Federal Minister of Finance. Mr. President, there are issues, and we must honestly address them. Some of these issues since 2019 have become a recurring decimal in all the MTEF that have been presented here. And one of them is what we're talking about, the issue of borrowing and deficit. We now have a situation where we have a deficit that has been growing year in, year out. When is it going to stop? Mr. President, we also have a situation where borrowing has been increasing year in, year out. When is it going to stop? Mr. President, these are issues that agitate the minds of Nigeria, especially when it concerns borrowing. Since the President sent a communication here about new borrowing, you know, we've been inundated with all kinds of questions. So, my concerns and observations on the presentation made by the chairman are very few but very germane, Mr. President. First, we have a situation where we have a deficit that has gone beyond the threshold of the Fiscal Responsibility Act 2007, which then means that, like I mentioned last year, it's either that we amend the Fiscal Responsibility Act as suggested by the chairman so as to accommodate this deficit, because year in, year out we've set up a law, and we, either consciously or unconsciously, are breaching it every year. The Fiscal Responsibility Act stipulates a threshold of 3%. Last year it was above the threshold. This year it is above by about 6% on that, Mr. President. Now, the chairman with the committee have made effort to reduce the deficit as it relates to GOEs. Mr. President, that has not yielded much result, because in this budget, as presented, the MTEF, the deficit of the GOEs have increased rather than decreasing. If we look at even their personnel costs, outside of the overhead costs, which has reduced marginally, the personnel cost has increased, and even their capital expenditure have increased in spite of the effort that the chairman, under his leadership, will try to make. So what the World Bank has prescribed as debt service to ratio of revenue is 25.5%, Mr. President. The situation we found ourselves now with this budget is that Nigerian debt service to revenue ratio is 67%. The implication of that is that every 100 naira that we earn in this Nigeria, 67 naira is used for debt service, which means we have only 3 naira available to Nigerians to spend. It is very scary, Mr. President, that you are earning 100 naira, spending 67 naira to service debt, if not even paying the debt. These are very scary scenarios that we must look at. Now, do we continue to borrow, or do we look elsewhere for us to get this money? Mr. President, there are areas that we will get. We had the issue of stamp duties, which were addressed in these chambers sometime last year. Now, it has been moved, called now electronic transfer. Mr. President, we put in 2020 about 500 billion. In this budget, what has come is 29.9 billion. We need an explanation to that, Mr. President. How can you move from 500 billion of stamp duty? We used to call it stamp duties. Federal Inland Revenue themselves in 2020 say that they had a business transaction of about 52 trillion. If we now multiply that by the stamp duties they collect, Mr. President, there is no way they will present only 29.9 billion. So if we are serious about addressing the issue of borrowing and reducing the deficit, these are areas I think that the Committee on Finance should be mandated to invite this MD of FRA. Let us know why he has moved from 500 billion last year to 29-point-something billion on stamp duty, which is now for electronic transfer. Mr. President, beyond that, I don't know whether the chairman is an oversight. For the first time, MTEF have captured extensively what you call tax expenditure. Mr. President, what tax expenditure, the statement of tax expenditure addresses the issue of waivers, deferrals with this thing. If we look at the waivers and deferrals that have been given, Mr. President, those alone are 2.4 trillion. Custom alone is supposed to give tax waivers of 780 billion. Out of that, import duty captured 600 billion. Who are the people who are benefiting from this tax, waivers? Which are the companies? And which is the cost benefit? Do we rather give waivers? Would that benefit us more than getting the money? Mr. President, under VAT is about 900 billion under the tax expenditure. These are waivers on food items. Which are the food items? We need to know. Let these people present us with those items one by one. If we say that under VAT, these people importing these items are not going to pay tax, let us know the items and know the beneficiaries. We'll go to CIT, that is company income tax. Which are the companies that are benefiting? What are they manufacturing? What are they doing? These are things that if we are serious about addressing the deficit and stop extensive borrowing, Mr. President, we must look into this. These are very serious issues that are presented here. Tax expenditure, this is the first time they are presenting it. The chairman didn't capture it. Maybe, I don't know why he didn't do that. Mr. President, we also, in managing an economy, we need to combine fiscal policies with monetary policies. Mr. President, the central bank has fared woefully under monetary policy. If we look at the MPR that they have just set up now, MPR, that is the monetary policy rate that goes to commercial banks, it's about 11.5%. Now, you loan money to commercial banks at 11.5%. Mr. President, none of us here, when you want to take money, it's about 20-something. The least is 19%. The saving rate is 1%. That means that the entire of the middle class has been wiped out because no person can go into mortgage. If you go to borrow, it's prohibitive. If you want to save your money, you only get 1%, which means nothing. That means that the central bank doesn't know what they're doing. So if we leave the monetary policy that they have tried to address, every time year in, year out is 11.5%. You go to borrow is 20-something. You go to save your money is 1%. No middle class person will ever go and say, I'm getting a loan to go and build a house. The middle class in this country is gradually going. Mr. President, the fiscal policy as presented by Minister of Finance on issues of tax, if that's serious, you won't be giving these waivers. In a budget that your deficit is 4-point-something, you are giving waivers of 2.4 trillion. You won't do that. So it is either that we are serious and we call these people to come and make presentation. Because we need to know, we need to serve Nigerians. We are the people who are inundated when we go to our villages or all kinds of demands. Those people sit in air-conditioned offices. Nobody goes to them for any demand. You go, you step out here, you open your phone. You say, my wife is giving birth. I'm marrying 2 wives. I'm marrying another one. It becomes a...
Senator Suswam, has anybody come to you because he wants to marry his second wife?
Now, and so, Mr. President, let us, and this is very, very important. The CBN governor should be invited before the entire House. Let him come and explain to us exactly what the monetary policy of this country is and why it will be impossible for me to go and save and get something more. And then if I want to borrow, I can't borrow. Let him come here so that we'll combine both the monetary policy and fiscal policy and be able to address...
You can round up now so that others are able to speak, please.
In rounding up, Mr. President, I want to suggest that in addressing the issue of deficit in our budget, that Nigeria have joint ventures with a lot of this, especially in the oil sector. And with the passing of the PIB, why can't Nigeria divest a little bit in some of these joint ventures so that we can raise more money in order for us to address this? And then even in collecting tax on PPT, the less holdings we have in this joint venture, the more of royalties and tax that we can collect from PPT. And so it serves us better now to divest a little bit of our holding in joint cash, because the money that you pay for joint venture cash calls, Mr. President, is unsustainable. So my suggestion is that let us divest some of our interests in some of the joint venture. We'll reduce paying joint venture cash calls. We will receive more tax from PPT, petroleum profit tax. We'll receive more tax from royalties. That will enhance our money, and then we'll reduce the issue of unsustainable borrowing that we're engaged in now. And then our budget gradually will be able to reduce. At some point, we hope that we will have a balanced budget in this country before the end of this administration. Mr. President, I saw some.
Mr. President, let me first of all commend the Joint Committee for a job well done. Its report is well put together. The observations and recommendations are based on informed data, as far as I can see, on empirical facts, and they present what the best that can be done. I want to add that I'm very much impressed by its recommendation with respect to blocking revenue leakages. This is very, very important, particularly in the area of the solid mineral resources, where the exploitation, a lot of exploitations are going on, but the monies that are supposed to accrue to government are not coming into government coffers. This has been a subject of discussion over the years within government circle, but nothing has been done to address the situation. It is therefore very important that this August Senate, in conjunction with the executive, to find a lasting solution, devise a means of blocking these leakages. Foreigners are coming to our country to exploit our solid minerals without paying the needed royalties and all money that is supposed to accrue to government. You have a lot of foreigners coming in, not only Nigerians. We must have a way of dealing with the situation. Mr. President, let me add that there are a lot of outcry about the loans that we are getting to develop our country. Mr. President, this is necessary. We need to say it loud and clear, it's necessary. Because no nation will remain without a sound, viable, and up and running economy. And you cannot do that without the enabling environment to provide that situation. Good roads, electricity, water supply infrastructure, rail system, and so on and so forth. We don't have that in this country yet. There were periods where we were awash with cash. We were having a lot of money, 10 years, 15 years back. But that was not done. Now it has dawned on us that we need to develop our economy. Do we just remain that way? We are not having the funds now. Do we just remain that way? No. We need to develop our economy, and so we need to borrow this money. By the time you borrow the money, get your infrastructure put in place, water resources, water supply infrastructure, electricity, roads, railway. You don't need to invite any foreigner to come and invest in this country. They will come themselves, because the market is here. We have the number of people that I need. The market is here. So, Mr. President, I want to say loud and clear that it's necessary. We cannot remain, our economy cannot remain the way it is now. The borrowing is going to develop our railway. We know that. The railway is being developed now. We are seeing what is going on. We are seeing what is going on in terms of producing gas. We have this gas, being the pipeline to length and, within the length and breadth of this country that will bring the cost of production and industry to be lower than what it is now. It's very, very important, sir. Everyone should understand that this borrowing is necessary. We need to have a viable economy. We cannot remain the way we are right now. So, Mr. President, I want everyone to understand this and support the report and, give the go-ahead for this report to be passed as presented by the Joint Finance Committee. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Takumbo Abiru.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. My name is Tokumbo Abiru, representing Lagos East. I would like to also join my colleagues in the compliments that they've extended to the committee that worked on this main presentation. And just like everybody had said, so that I don't have to repeat some of the things that they had said, I think the concerns around the deficit too is some area that I also would like to speak to. Yes, I agree that at this point in time, and particularly the way both the global economy and our own economy has fared in the last few years, will suggest that we don't have a choice but to also continue to get some reasonable loans that will continue to improve our development. But however, I think that part of what I think we should concern ourselves with, and particularly based on the presentation here, and some of the observations, particularly during the committee meeting, is how do we moderate the deficit? Some of the things that came out very clearly at the committee stage, which I would like to latch on here, is the fact that most of the revenue-generating agencies of government, we still need to push them for them to maximize their capacity to continue to generate revenue. And I will try and give some examples. Number one of the major revenue earners for this country, like we all know, is oil. Now, if we look at what is happening today, as the world is getting relaxed based on the discovery of the vaccine and all of that, even OPEC is increasing the world output in terms of quota. But what do we find? Our own oil agency here is still falling short of even the capacity that they have. They have an average capacity, as it has been analyzed in this report, of 2.5 million barrels on a daily basis. But even based on the existing quota, they are still falling short. And what ordinarily, if you look, part of what we deduce is that we still lose average of about 114 or above 100,000 barrels of oil in a day. If you extrapolate that in a year, you are talking of over 40 million barrels. That is in excess of ₦1 trillion. Those are revenues that can moderate the deficit, and those are revenues that can also even improve our capacity to repay debt. That is on one side. You have other agencies of government. The national, the NCC, the presentation they had to us, if we look at it, I'm not sure their capacity as to what they are likely to do in 2022 has been factored here. Those are areas where we can enhance our revenue. So my own contribution would be that if we look at the recommendation 15, which specifically said that the proposed budget of the government-owned enterprises should be reviewed upward to show reflection of their capacities to generate more revenue. I think it sounds to me very generic. I think that this chamber should mandate the Committee on Finance to still sit down with these agencies in order to see how we can enhance their budget in terms of revenue, so that our ability to reduce our deficit and continue to show our ability to repay even the loans that we are contracting will be seriously moderated. That will be my contribution, Mr. President.
Senator Aishatu Dairu Ahmed.
Our distinguished colleagues, Aisha Dairu Ahmed Binani, representing Adamawa Central. Mr. President, I will follow suit like the other speakers to commend the joint committee for a job well done, and specifically to commend the Finance Committee, because in a long time, the federal government independent revenue has never been over and above what has always been assumed estimated. But in this January 2021 January to May 2021, the pro rata was 442.46 billion, but we are able to realize 487.01 billion, which is stated in the MTEF that was given to us. So if the trend continues, certainly by the end of by December, we will be able to realize over 1 trillion. So I'm commending that Committee on Finance for that. Having said that, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, the MTEF, just like the previous speaker said, is the bedrock for all our budget. And all these deficits that we are talking about, the major issue here, Mr. President, there are some fiscal items that are not budgeted for in the budget, but you see that those items are being serviced. So definitely the budget of the country will definitely run into trouble. Just like what the chairman of the committee said, that there was 189.93 billion that was a deduction from the oil and gas, and he said this is mainly attributed to the petroleum subsidy cost, which was not provided for in the 2021 budget. That is not just the only item, Mr. President. If you look through the MTEF, you will realize that there is another item called ways and means, interest on ways and means. It's not even the principal, but the interest on ways and means. In 2020, that interest on ways and means, January through to December, huge sum of money was paid on that respect, almost to 1 trillion. That's about 912 billion. And that was not budgeted for in the budget. It wasn't captured in the budget. So they had to now source the money from the appropriated physical items and then pay for it. As if that was not enough, Mr. President, in 2021, January to May, just 5 months, about 480.52 billion naira was also paid for ways and interest on ways and means. If that is the interest, what is the principal? We will need to know what is the principal. This is just 5 months. So the meaning is that before we get to December, we will be talking about trillion paying just an interest. So we need somebody to come and explain to us what is the principal that we are paying this interest on. So with this alone, this is just one of the components, Mr. President. There are some like that. So if we are not strict with our budget, certainly we will always run into problems. This deficit will always surface. But this item, we need somebody from CBN to come and explain to us what is this waste and what is this interest on waste and means. It's very, very important. And I want to ask the chairman, the Committee on Finance, if they are paying operating surplus on this, or are they exempted? If they are paying, let us know. And if they are exempted, let us know. And another thing is that the GOCs, the Committee on Finance, we need the GOCs the operating surplus should be detailed in accordance with the agencies, so that the non-performing agencies should not be hiding under the performing ones, because each time it comes as GOCs, then you now see the amount. I think the dollar to naira something, Mr. Senator Naala has already spoken on that. To this end, I wish to say that we must try as much as possible to see that the budget is funded according to the way it is appropriated, because anything short of that, all this payment outside the budget is violating the Appropriation Act. Lastly, Mr. President, I want to commend the Ministry of Finance and Budget, because at least the MTEF, by the day, every year, they are making it more and more comprehensive compared to the previous years. But I would also want to urge that henceforth, detailed estimates should always be provided in the MTEF for oil component, for oil deduction component, oil subsidy, debt services, ways and means. Let us have it detailed captured. And also, if it's possible, we will also appreciate if they can accompany the MTEF with the second quarter BIR report, that is budget implementation report, just the financial, because it will help us in analyzing the MTEF. Thank you very much.
Senator Ahmed Ademalero.
In the international market was 63.
Now it is 74. So I would want us to jack it up by making it at least 65 instead of 57. By so doing, we will avoid a situation where we will have the so-called excess oil proceeds, which is considered as slush funds and can be utilized anyhow. So our responsibility as members of the National Assembly is to ensure judicious use of the revenue for the people of Nigeria. Secondly, Mr. President, the issue of tax collection has been a problem in this country. As stated in the report, the FIRs have to widen the tax net. It is true that a lot of revenue that should have been collected is not being collected. The FIRs is underperforming. There are situations where companies are supposed to pay tax, but for one reason or the other, they are ignored. We have seen huge profits being declared by banks, at times 100 billion, 80 billion, 70 billion, but nobody asks how much tax is collected in these banks. So my suggestion is that we should look inward by collecting more revenue to fund our budget instead of embarking on borrowing. I'm not against borrowing, as long as it is meant for provision of infrastructure, railway, roads, power, education, housing, and what have you. These are areas where borrowing should be channeled into, not for consumption. So the issue of exchange rate has been as said by other previous speakers. It is unrealistic for us to maintain 210 naira per dollar when the parallel market is now over 500 naira. We should look into that with the view of probably merging the two markets together, but the two rates together. Thirdly, Mr. President, the issue of subsidy. It is high time for us in the Parliament to consider the issue of subsidy. As said by the GMB on MFPC, the importation of PMS does not really reflect our consumption. And at one time, he even said that over 30% of what is being imported is not consumed in Nigeria. It is being smuggled out of the country. So do we continue to sustain this subsidy when we know in actual sense that most of what is being imported is being diverted outside? I'm of the view that we should review this. The mining sector, Mr. President, is a very important sector of the economy when we are considering diversification. There is no way we can diversify the economy without considering the mining sector in Nigeria. It has capacity to generate employment and generate a lot of revenue for this country, but it's being ignored. As said by previous speaker, it is uncoordinated, unregulated, and a lot of illegal mining is taking place. And billions of solid minerals is being carted away out of the country without Nigeria benefiting anything. Mr. President, the issue of agriculture. As said in this report, there is large-scale smuggling and diversion of revenue as a result of a lack of scanners. It's not only that, Mr. President. The anchor borrower scheme supported by the federal government is seriously in jeopardy because of heavy smuggling of agricultural products, namely poultry products, rice, textiles, frozen fish, vegetable oil. A lot of vegetable oil is being produced in this country, but it's not being sold because of large-scale smuggling of vegetable oil coming into Nigeria at our border. rice millers are now crying. They have a lot of rice in their stores, and there is no market because every day a lot of trucks load of rice is coming into Nigeria without paying import duty. They are supposed to pay duty at 70%. So there is need for us to look at this, Mr. President. Mr. President, I come back again on the issue of tax. Telecommunication companies, cement companies are declaring huge sums of money as profits, but nobody asks how much they pay as tax. This is where the problem is. If you tax these companies enough money, if you tax them properly, there will be enough money to pay for our obligations without necessarily borrowing. Nigeria is borrowing so much money. So there is need for us to look inward and see what we can do to collect more money and reduce borrowing. I so submit, Mr. President.
Senator Albert Basi Akpan.
Allows you to use the instrument of government expenditure and taxation on the fiscal side, and of course the management of our interest rate and exchange rate, and of course money supply on the monetary side. But I believe that the Central Bank of Nigeria seems to be running on its own without really collaborating with the Minister of Finance and other related government agencies to see how we can actually strike a balance between these two instruments of managing our economy. But be that as it may be, the President, let me even commend this Senate because it's only basically in the ninth Senate that we're actually dipping and then taking seriously the need to look into what agencies are doing as regards the operational surplus and most of the retained earnings of parastatals. But I believe that a lot still needs to be done, Mr. President. And nobody can stand here to say he's against borrowing because, of course, in a period of economic depression of this nature, it is.
Distinguished colleagues, please clear the aisles, please.
An aggressive government expenditure backed up by borrowing that can actually save or sustain the nation's economy. But, Mr. President, where you have a total budget of 13 trillion, 6.2 trillion on recurrent expenditure, then 3.26 trillion on capital expenditure, and of course, personnel 4.9, and a deficit of 5-point-something trillion. It is where one is beginning to wonder, and we are worried that I hope that some of this borrowing that we are borrowing, how does it go straight into direct activity that can generate enough economic activities and also generate enough cash flow to even sustain our borrowing. So I believe that as a Senate and our various committees must equally be up and doing in terms of oversight. We can't just be passing policy instruments of this nature without backing it up by effective oversight, because we must begin to deepen our knowledge about what is actually happening in the various agencies that we are oversighting. And I'm happy that the President, of course, the PIA, the Petroleum Industry Act, is enforced now. So most of those loopholes and weaknesses and leakages that we had experienced in our oil and gas sector will begin to yield positive outcomes, because I know.
Please, Senator Baro Jibrin, stop disturbing Senator Aishatu and Senator Obasani.
So we will begin to checkmate most of these leakages. Then we'll begin to see fruition in the coming in the coming months. But I really have hope, Mr. President, that under your leadership, this National Assembly has done a lot, and I must commend you for that. Mr. President, one recommendation that comes in and out, year in, year out, in in our medium-term expenditure framework is always, if you look at findings 9, 10, and 12, is always the recurrence decimal in most of our MTEF. We keep saying that agencies that personnel costs of some agencies are out of order, that frivolous deductions and diversion of funds on the disguise from revenue on agencies. These are current decimals year in year out. And also, of course, the many acts and observation 18, we say the many acts setting up the agencies of governments are not nationalistic but self-saving. I believe that it should be clear, and our Committee on Compliance should also ensure that all our relevant committees must look into the laws establishing the agencies under them. And see, okay, very soon we are bringing the amendment to the NNRA Act on the basis of this, which is also here for us to pass. And so these are things so we must make sure that observation that we find in this MTEF should not really come up again in next instance. That's the only way we can underscore our performances as a National Assembly. I can tell you, Mr. President and distinguished colleagues, for free, it is our responsibility to make sure that this country works. Because it is the law that we passed here that is implemented by the executive. So we can compel the executive under the laws that we pass to ensure that things get done, and we can begin to put Nigeria on a trajectory of progress and good governance. These are the only ways we feel that these things can be settled. Because as we are in now, Mr. President, very soon the budget will come, and the same story will go back again. And if we also are adjusting the benchmark parameters, we don't need to bring in new projects. Those differentials should be used to bring down the deficit. We can't be borrowing at the country all year in, year out. So I thank you, Mr. President, for the sense of direction that you have set for the National Assembly, and God bless you all. Thank you. Thank you.
Distinguished Senator
our very dear colleague who just finished making contribution.
Senator Albert, you have just finished. There is a point of order against you, so take your seat and listen to the point of order. No, go back to your seat so that you listen to the point of order. Okay, noted.
Distinguished colleagues, I am Senator George Thompson, Secretary, Rivers East. Mr. President, just as most of my colleagues have said, I commend the chairman of the Finance Committee to bring out a document like this with this full analysis and then reading it as if it's a national address without hiccups. I think he has done very well. What the committee has done is to put before us what they see and what they observe. It is in our hands as a Senate to agree or to disagree. So, Mr. President, I will just pick about 4 issues to discuss. The first is the issue of borrowing. Like most of my colleagues have said, I am not against borrowing. But when a particular thing becomes incessant, every year we are borrowing. 2019, it was 2.2 trillion. And then it graduated gradually to 2020. Now is 4.89 trillion. And this is 35% of the budget. That means that maybe in the next 2-3 years, if we are still in this chamber, we may be borrowing 50% of our total budget. So we have to look at it properly and see if there are things we need to do to reduce the borrowing instead of increasing it annually. And of course, as Senator Smart said, if it is borrowed and injected into physical things we are seeing with our eyes, no person will fight against it. That is the first one. The other one is this borrowing. Your Excellency, our 2020 budget pegs the petroleum product at $50-something. Today, they are selling at 74, that is called $74. That difference, what do we do with it? Because that's a difference. If the budget came in with $50-something, and then now it is being sold at $74, that is a huge difference, over $10. And if we take that on a pro rata basis, it's going to give us so much money. I think if we ask a fundamental question on that, the use of the extra fund, I'm sure it will be able to reduce our level of borrowing. The other one is the exchange rate, sir. In 2019, it was $304 exchange rate, even though it did not stand. Last year, $375. Today, we're seeing that the proposal is $410. Maybe in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, it will be $1,000 naira to $1. Where are we heading to? I agree with my colleagues. We say we need to invite the CBN or the governor of Central Bank to find out his financial policies and monetary policies. And then why we can't have a steady exchange rate, at least for 2 years. When it was 304, we were all shouting as if the country is heading to a doom. Today is 410. But Mr. President, this 410 we are seeing on this paper now, it is not what is obtainable in the market, in the black market. And in the black market, I'm sure it's about 550 or maybe more. So we have a problem. Now, this 410 they are talking about, who really gets it? If I want to get money, naira to dollar, can I easily get it if I apply? How long does it take? So this one is not even for the general public. It's for special or specific people or for purposes. So I think we have a fundamental problem. We need to learn from him, call him and ask him why it is happening that way. Mr. President, the issue of inflation rate of 13%, and it is recommended that we should accept it. I know this country had worked hard before and got to single digit. Now from that single digit, it is going gradually. Today is 13%. I believe the hit on this, of this 13% on our people will be tremendous, and there will be a real outcry. Now, we have also been asked to also approve it. Mr. President, budget deficit of 5.62 trillion. What is it? It is 40.2% of the budget. That is a huge number. It is 40.2% of the budget. Today, it is 40.2%. It wasn't so 2 years ago. It wasn't so last year. Now, when we approve this, what is going to happen in the next 2-3 years? Maybe the deficit will be over 50% of the budget. So we also have to look at these parameters and see how we can curtail it. I am saying so because it is in our power here to say no, and this is what we want, even though we don't have the power, the technical know-how actually to control the economy of the country, but we can give a direction. That's why I'm saying all this work. Mr. President, the other area that is of great concern is observation 8.8. 9.68 trillion, which is 69.24%, going into recurrent expenditure. While the purpose of servicing this recurrent expenditure will take 3.26%. 23%. What am I saying? Capital project, 3.26 trillion, which is actually 23.3%. And the purpose of government is to provide for their welfare. The purpose of government is to provide infrastructure. The purpose of government is to give our people a joy, a sense of belonging by inclusiveness when doing out our things. And the only way they can be included, that it can be inclusiveness, is in spending for their own needs. Now today, we are going to...
You may round up, please.
For the current expenditure. I think we have to look inward and see where any area we can make, block some leakages, so that the recurrent, especially overhead expenditure, can be drastically brought down, and then add more to capital expenditure to service our people. Thank you very much.
Distinguished colleagues, I've given